All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. So glad to have you here. We're going to be talking about navigating Florida's BEST standards, specifically how to use our scaffolded resources at Uncomplicate Ed to help teach and uncomplicate and instruct using the BEST. As mentioned, this is through Uncomplicate Ed, where just as the name indicates, we are all about uncomplicating education for teachers, for leaders, for parents, and ultimately for students, right? My name is Ashley Doty. I am the founder and CEO of Uncomplicate Ed. Happy to be here with you all tonight.
And I'm Megan Cox. I'm the Professional Development Manager with Uncomplicate Ed. Just a few quick reminders for today and logistics. Please make sure that you're muted and that the video is off. Just a reminder that this will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel when it's available. And finally, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we're going to go ahead and answer those at the end if there's time.
All right, so let's dig right in. If you haven't taken a look at the BEST manual for ELA, I recommend that you do. Of course, not right now. Please stay with us till the end. I usually just do a Google search of CPALM's ELA BEST standards every time, make it my favorites, and I can get right to it. The whole point of the new BEST standards, or one of the main points, was to make the standards more clear and concise for educators, for parents, and all stakeholders. But there are a few problems that have come up with that. We want to address three main problems that we've heard as we've been traveling around the state of Florida and working with teachers in schools, and problems that we sort of noticed as well. So let's take a quick example or look at the reading informational text standard for, I believe we're looking at first grade, right? First grade. So we're looking at the 4 benchmarks under the reading informational text standard: structure, central idea, purpose and perspective, and argument. Now, many of the benchmarks in the BEST manual that the Department of Education has released have clarifications, but many don't. In fact, looking at this one, we can see that there is benchmark clarification for purpose and perspective. In fact, there's 2 of them, but there are no clarifications for structure, central idea, or argument. And we're not given really much else in terms of how to dissect these or really even how to interpret them. So that can lead to differences in perspective. I don't know how many of you have seen, I love these sorts of which way you look at it looks like different things. Is this the duck or is this the bird? Depends on how you look at it. And I think that that's true with standards as well. And even our new BEST standards, which again, many are more clear and concise, but some still are up to interpretation, not just across a state, but oftentimes within a school building. One first grade teacher might look at a benchmark and think it is meaning one way, where another might see it and look a different way altogether. And that just reminded me of the whole viral thing. I don't know how many of you remember this from a few years ago. What color is the dress? I just had to bring this back up because I remember that being a thing. It just depended on how you looked at it. And people got into arguments about this, right? Well, again, not the same thing as what color is the dress, but still looking at how do we interpret these benchmarks when we aren't given a lot of guidance. So that's the first problem, is different perspectives. Second problem is benchmarks are meant to be mastered by the end of the year, right? We know that as educators that they aren't intended to be mastered to the end of the year. So if I'm a second grade teacher at the beginning of the year, I can't expect my fresh off of the first grade wagon students to be able to master things that aren't intended to be mastered till the end of the year. So that leaves us with the problem of, well, what does mastery then look like throughout the year? How do I know a student is on track to master the benchmarks in the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year? This was always an issue with me in terms of communicating with parents. So in the beginning of the year, we're reading easier text than the end perhaps, and a student maybe mastered central idea in the beginning of the year, but as the year got along and the texts got harder and maybe we were more complex, they stopped. They maybe didn't keep up that mastery. And then that was a hard conversation with parents. Why did they master it here and not here? So that's a second problem, right? The third problem is there is a lot of information out there with the BEST standards through the Department of Education. We've got appendices and clarifications, vocabulary, and the benchmark, standards, stacking, glossary. And here's just some screenshots of the table of contents if you haven't seen it yet. So there is a lot of information out there to help us be more clear, Looking at the one in the middle, so we've got a few appendices there that continues over here to the right, including a glossary of terms. And this is K-12. Well, if I only teach, let's say kindergarten, I don't really need all this. What do I need? Is there something that can just give me what I need and nothing else? So here's our problems again. How can I make sure that the benchmarks are clear and concise for me? How can I know if my students are on track to mastering benchmarks by the end of the year? And how do I uncomplicate all of the information that is in the B.E.S.T manual? And that's where our solution comes in, our roadmap to mastering reading comprehension, scaffolded resources to support teaching and learning of the B.E.S.T standards.
So we're going to go ahead and dig into what's going to be included in the roadmap that we just discussed. Just as a disclaimer, we are focusing solely on reading and the various standards and benchmarks that are within the strand of reading. So what is included in our roadmap? We have rubrics. Those are going to be the heart of what's included. To help you identify where the students are throughout the school year, which was one of those problems that we had talked about. There's going to be question stems that are going to be scaffolded throughout the school year. There's also these wonderful student anchor charts that go along with the benchmarks to help provide guidance to your students to master those benchmarks throughout the school year. All-inclusive one-stop shop from the ELA manual. Like we said, there are various parts throughout the benchmarks and standards that were provided from the state, but we went ahead and condensed them on down to what was really needed. And finally, some suggestions for those ELA expectations for stacking. How can you take all of those parts that are best practice, talking about in the B.E.S.T, and putting them into practice with those benchmarks? So like we said, at the heart of our roadmap is going to be our rubrics. We're going to dive on into what those look like. This is a second grade example. At the very top, you're going to see the standard and the benchmark. We're going to look at explaining an author's opinion and supporting evidence. This is the argument portion for the strand or the standard. Finally, below that, you're going to see a summary and just the general understanding of what text complexity students should be exposed to, whether it's being read aloud to them or independently read throughout the school year. You're going to see some indication for Faunus and Pinnell levels because some schools are still using that. There's also going to be indication from the Lexile levels, and these are going to be aligned with the STAR assessment that we're using for K2 in the state of Florida. Finally, looking ahead, the heart of the rubrics is actually looking at and we're going to dive in more specifically what is it within this, but this is what students should be able to do at the beginning of the year. Finally, emerging mastery mid-year, and at the end of the year, that proficient mastery and what that's going to look like. We're going to dig on in, because that's the point of the year that we're at, is emerging mastery for this benchmark. So when we go ahead and dig in, the very first bullet point for all of our rubrics is going to state what the student should be able to do at that point in the year. Below that, you're going to see the modalities in which your students should be able to demonstrate that mastery of that benchmark during that specific time frame. And finally, below that, my favorite part, the prompts. How am I going to have my students demonstrate that? It's going to give you a couple examples. So for example, with which statement would the author most likely agree? Tell me why you believe that. Or how did the author tell you their opinion about the topic? How did they use their words, visuals, and other text features to clue you into their opinion? These are going to be provided for various parts throughout the school year, and they're going to scaffold an increase in complexity as the year goes on, as the benchmark should increase in its complexity. And then looking at the whole part of the rubric, you'll see that we took the clarifications. This specific example actually had no clarifications. So as we were digging through the benchmarks, we found it helpful to go ahead and maybe sometimes head back to that benchmark prior or the benchmark that's actually after to understand what that benchmark would need in order to demonstrate that mastery. So in this specific example, we went ahead and pulled from kindergarten, the kindergarten clarifications. And moving on through, below that, you're going to see the vertical notes portion, which is my absolute favorite, especially with these benchmarks being so new, not so much for our K-2, as you guys had already implemented this the year prior, but it's just a good refresher for all to understand what should my students, what should they have come to me understanding? What are they going to know now? And what would they learn after the benchmark that is for this grade level? And it's just a quick summary of what that will look like based upon the indicators from the benchmark. Below that, you're going to see the ELA expectations, or those EEs. We went ahead and just pulled what EEs would be applicable in a one-step with this benchmark in reading. And finally, at the bottom, you're going to see the stacking, meaning what benchmarks could you put along with the benchmark at the top to do best practice with the best. You're going to go ahead on this next page, and you're going to see that this is actually a 5th grade example. We don't have it highlighted at the top, but you'll see that this is no longer that 2nd grade example. But in that 2nd grade example, there was no glossary terms and there was no additional terms that were needed because that benchmark explained all that. But that's not always true. So we went ahead and pulled those glossary terms for the benchmarks that warranted it. But then we also found when we were digging through the benchmarks that there was additional terms that weren't always in the glossary that would be beneficial for us to all have common language as to what that term might mean to help our students master that benchmark. Finally, like I said, this is just looking a whole picture view of an all-encompassing resource. Just want to go ahead and highlight something. Those prompts that we went ahead and put onto there, those were aligned with the STAR prompts focus skills. We want to make sure that those were aligned with what our students are being assessed with, and that is where we pulled those skills from, along with looking at the benchmark. So when we think about planning, and we think about stacking and all those wonderful best practices, we felt it was also beneficial to go ahead and take our prompts that we had and make a one-sheeter reference based upon what strand and reading you were working on. So you'll see this is reading informational text at the top. We were focusing on argument, and that's the part at the bottom. And it lists those prompts that we had talked about based upon the STAR. That's going to be at the bottom. That's going to list where our students should be mastering throughout the school year. The benefit of this page is it provides your ability to go ahead and stack those benchmarks. So if you're going to work an argument and you're going to add a central idea in there, you just pull a question from each one of those based upon the point of the school year you are at on this all-encompassing resource. And at the very bottom, you're going to see sample text by standard. This is just a quick summary from the BEST manual that just has those sample texts that you might use along with those standards. There's also the list right next to the text that shows what benchmarks, according to the state, could be stacked.
Thank you, Megan. There's a lot of great resources in there, and we're really excited about them, but there is more that's included in our roadmaps. I want to show you what it could look like with prose and poetry. So obviously the very first standard in the reading strand is prose and poetry. Now tonight we are focusing on nonfiction, but I wanted to show you what else was in there. So what we did, again, instead of having to go into the BEST manual and find the glossary terms, or maybe your curriculum that you have at your school doesn't include these pieces from the manual. So what we did is we took the items from the glossary that just pertain to K2, in this case, prose and poetry. You don't have to look through all of it. You don't have to skip through, because remember, that's K-12 back there. Only what you're going to need in K2, prose and poetry. Then check out the additional terms. Megan, I think, explained this really well. There was a lot of terms that we felt like, wow, we're surprised these weren't included in the glossary. So let's go ahead and include those. And you'll see where we cited those definitions throughout. Here's the example for informational text. Again, glossary terms on the left, additional terms. But here's an example on the right of one of the tables that was included in the appendix of the B.E.S.T manual, where it has the elementary text features. So you don't have to go searching for it. It's going to be right there in the same section with all the other informational text. So again, really helpful, trying to uncomplicate it for all of you to keep everything just in one place. Here's a cross genres example, glossary terms on the left. And again, you don't need secondary figurative language if we're doing K2. Trust me, there was some words in there that I had never even heard. I had to like Google sound. How do you even say this word? But we only need elementary right now, right? So I'm just going to include what you need for K2 or for 3.5 from the appendix. So again, very, very helpful. Lots of great resources for teachers, but what about for our students? And this is probably my favorite part of the roadmaps, or the student-friendly anchor charts. What we did is we took the benchmark and turned it into student-friendly language. We got a lot of feedback out we've been circulating these in the field since last February. So we got a lot of feedback from teachers across the state on what works and what their district expects and how it's going to be easy for them. So we heard a lot of feedback that I can statements in many districts are going away and putting it in a more learning target language. So that's what you'll see there at the top. This is still the 2R2-4 argument that Megan was walking us through on the rubrics. When I read nonfiction texts, I identify an author's opinion with supporting evidence. This is the student version of that sort of rubric. We're putting it into images that are just easier. And I'm going to be honest with you, I actually find these easy for myself as well. And I just want a quick glance at what this benchmark is saying. So reiterated what opinion means, because again, we're on argument, showed them some different opinions from a text, and how then the student would take all of those different opinions to come up with the author's overall opinion on the text with evidence. You might notice there that at the bottom, there are some icons. So let's talk about those a little bit. Again, trying to make it easy for everybody, uncomplicate it. These icons actually correlate to the points in the year from the rubrics of what the students will demonstrate mastery. So you won't see all of these on any single rubric, but wanted to show all of the icons here to you. This one, you could probably guess the students having to do an oral description of whatever the question prompt is. They just explain it orally, draw it out, write it out, sort, graphic organizer, multiple choice, or graphic organizer more on a timeline, which we see more in the upper grades when students have to track an argument or track the theme. So again, really helpful to have these icons there for the student to know how are they going to be expected to show their learning by the end of the year. All right, let's head back into the student-friendly anchor charts. This is still argument, but this is the kindergarten version. Of course, not all these words are decodable. That's not the purpose of this part of reading right now. We're talking about comprehension, right? So we're giving the students just something to anchor onto for how they're learning fact and opinion, kindergarten. And here's first grade. You might notice that the first grade one looks similar to second grade. And of course, that's done intentionally. But there's a different element here. In first grade, the students don't have to explain, nor do they have to provide evidence at mastery level, where in second grade they do. So let's see what they might look like all together. The icons that we've done throughout each grade level are consistent. So that way, if as a school, you all are using these roadmaps, the student will travel through the grade levels seeing similar icons and images. So that's going to help with consistency and make the learning stick. So here's structure examples right here. Here is central idea. Again, you can see very easily how even that vertical alignment is. Kindergarten, topic details. First grade, relevant details get added. And second grade, central idea. Here's author's purpose and perspective, of which there is not a kindergarten benchmark. And we just walked through argument right here. Now, how do we put it all together? So if I am trying to plan with the benchmarks, with comprehension in particular, I would probably start with this page. And I'd start with this page because I like looking at everything at a glance. Okay, if argument is my primary benchmark for this week or this unit as determined by my scope and sequence or my curriculum, okay, it says argument's my main thing. Awesome. I'm going to go here and grab some questions depending on where I am at each part in the year. But I also might look at some sample texts if I'm looking for additional text that maybe my curriculum didn't provide or that I just want to enhance. My students need more practice with it. So I'm just going to walk us through what I might do if I was a second grade teacher looking for how to use argument in a lesson with these roadmaps. I'm looking down at the sample text by standard. Remember, these came directly from Florida's B.E.S.T manual. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this Give Bees a Chance. It's kind of tiny on your screen probably, but what I notice about it is that it does include argument, because that's 2-4, but I also like that it includes actually all 4 of the benchmarks from informational text. So I can get a lot out of this one text. I can stack in all 4 of these benchmarks, even if argument's my primary. I'm weaving in, right? Doing those interleading practices so that students don't forget, hey, all of these things are really what we need to be effective readers. All right, so here's my Give Bees a Chance. I might even start with, hey, the title in itself already gives me an idea of the author's opinion, right? One of the text features, giving bees a chance. All right, so then I'm going to go to my rubric. Let's say it's December, so I'm right here. I'm going to look at my questions and I'm going to see, okay, they're going to have to identify the author's opinion and provide a detail from the words, visuals, or text features to support their claim. You can skim and scan through some of the prompts here, statements the author would agree with, and how did the author communicate their opinion on the text? Got it? Now, I'm also going to keep in mind that I can differentiate some of my questions, right? So even though it's December, that doesn't mean I might leave these questions behind, especially if I have students that are still operating at this level currently. So I can pull from there, and then I can also demonstrate or differentiate by pulling for some of my more advanced students and start sprinkling in some of these higher order questions from the end of the year. Okay, other quick notes. Let's see, clarifications, difference between fact and opinion, that's helpful. The vertical note tells me some prior knowledge. So in first grade, they had to explain an author's opinion. Now we're adding in evidence, so that's the new piece. So I want to make sure I hit that, drive that home. And I can kind of see the content limits here, that in third grade, they are actually going to move on to claim. So that tells me at second grade, I'm the last stop of fact and opinion before we start bringing in that other level of complexity of claim. So I've got to make sure as a second grade teacher, they're leaving me with a very firm grasp of fact and opinion, because claim's about to mess up their whole world, right? All right, expectations, citing evidence, that makes sense, because they have to support with evidence, so that's perfect. And then, of course, I'm going to have to make an inference of the author's opinion, because I seriously doubt the author just came out and said, my opinion about bees is. So you'll see, this is a pretty cute text if you haven't read it. It kind of does make it pretty obvious. That's appropriate for our second graders. All right, stacking, all the other info texts, paraphrase and summarize, I could pull that in. It even tells me I can pull in some of writing down here, argumentative writing, perhaps where the student has to demonstrate their own opinion piece using text features and that sort of stuff. And then expository writing, that can just be a short response where they are explaining the author's opinion here, which is part of the benchmark. And of course, academic vocabulary. I can almost always pull that in, right? I want to make sure my students know the terms fact, opinion, evidence, and not just know them, but use those terms when we're discussing in class. All right, that's helpful right there. I'm going to take a quick glance at my student rubric or my student anchor chart. Got it. We're pulling from the different opinions for them to explain with evidence. And now I'm ready to dive into my text. So of course, I'm using an authentic text. Give these a chance. If you have a curriculum you already use, then fine, use the text that's there too. I like using sticky notes to jot down the questions I'm going to stop and ask my students throughout. So I pulled up the questions over here on the left from the rubric. And I'm just reminding myself here, that I want to pull in about, let's see, visuals, text features, fact and opinion. So here's a great example of that from the book here. Which items on here are facts and opinion? And I can call their attention to this diagram illustration here, the difference between the facts and opinions with the parts of the bee. Found another spot in the book where the author just says, once you learn how great they are, you're bound to fall in love with them. Okay, so we're getting into author's purpose and opinion here, right? Sort of overlap, which is good. We want our students to see that all these things are connected. So I want to make sure I ask about that. And then I also noticed that the author talked about importance of bees and how important they are to the ecosystem. And without bees, there'd be a lot of less yummy stuff to eat. So what are they trying to convince us of here by looking at this picture? It's going to be important for our students to know. All right, just to go back for a second, I love this first question. With which statement would the author most likely agree? Great higher order question there. So after creating this, my questions throughout the text, I might come up with some statements that I think the students would really get them thinking. Which of these statements would the author most likely agree and why? This is a great opportunity to use those ELA expectations of them discussing, collaborating. I definitely am going to want my students to maybe turn and talk, or a small group discussion. Which would the author agree with and why? Love that question. And it also frees them a little bit of having to go directly into the text. We're trying to get them to synthesize here. Again, do this whole group, have them think about it and talk it out with their classmates. Now, I also recall that there were, it was suggested they do a graphic organizer with this. Again, this could be something that's already included in my curriculum, but it might not be. If I want to make sure that I'm aligning to what the BEST has and going beyond the curriculum where it needs it. So I just found some writing paper. I think this is a free download. All teachers pay teachers. And the students would just then, I might have them provide 3 pieces of evidence from the text of an author's opinion. I probably will require maybe an example from the words, an example from the visuals, an example of a different text feature. So I want them to draw a picture and write about it. And if they can cite it with the page number, even better. Then I want them to take their 3 opinions from the text and synthesize it. So what was the author's overall opinion, in this case about bees, and how do you know? So I'm really scaffolding this down for them, right? They identified 3 opinions from the text. Now I want them to use those 3 pieces they identified to support what they're going to write here over on the right, the author's overall opinion. Now, whether you already have a curriculum that you use, and I just pulled the main 4 I've seen schools using across the state, Benchmark Advanced, Into Reading, Wonders My View. You might have one of these, you might have something else, you might have nothing. Okay, but whatever you have, what I like about the roadmaps is they provide flexibility with those question stems, with the learning targets, with the student charts and assessment types. You really can use it with anything because it's based on the standards. It's not based on a curriculum. It's based on best practice. And as Megan mentioned earlier, we even taking those STAR focus skills that your students have to take that STAR, right? 3 times a year, the Renaissance, STAR early learning for early literacy, and STAR reading. Took a lot of the questions and derived some from there to see what the students are going to have to answer, or the level the students are going to have to answer. Of course, aligning it to BEST is the primary thing, not aligning it to a test. But that's what I like about this. It's a lot more flexible. Now, when do these get released? They're coming out in January. And right now we've priced them at $80 for a K-2 or for a 3-5. We will be coming out with middle school and high school. They are in draft form. They're pretty far along in the process, but they're not ready to be completed just yet. We want to do a little bit more work on those student anchor charts in particular. These are going to be released in January. We priced it around $80, what we've seen comparable, and really that's going to cover our printing costs as well as the cost it was to create these rubrics. So trying to keep them at a minimal cost for you all as educators and for schools. That said, we are doing a pre-sale right now for the entire month of December. We're going to give 15% off if you pre-order. So that means instead of $80, they're going to be $68 a piece. They will ship out in January when they are ready to be printed. But this deal's only going on through the pre-order, which is in December. So that's the single cost. You will be able to go to purchase those pre-orders now. We just launched it today, December 1st. So that is live in the store. I think Megan just put the link to the store there in the chat box. And for those of you in the recording, you can see it right there on the screen. We'll include it in the YouTube channel and in the description below. But again, only for the month of December, we're doing 15% off, so from $80 to $68. And that's from anywhere from 1 to 4. If you need 5 or more, so you want to go in with some other teachers, or you're a school leader and you're thinking about getting this for your entire staff, then just contact me. There's my email address, ashley@uncomplicateed.com. It'll look like Uncomplicate Ed. Make sure it goes to me. But we can do, obviously, deeper discounts for that bulk pricing. So if you do need 5 or more, holler at me, let me know, and we'll get you a deal. All right, but what about those free downloads that I promised you? We are giving you the entire informational text argument benchmark for free at the link there on the screen. And again, Megan has thrown that link in the chat box. Thank you, Megan. So you can go ahead and get your free download. It will include the rubrics with question stems, and it will also include the student anchor chart, which very easy to throw up on the screen when you're teaching it, print out for your students, or as mentioned, even share it with parents so that they know what's going on and get that homeschool connection. But again, all argument is available right there at that site for you to use now. And it's actually K-5. So even though the focus tonight was K-2, we're providing all K-5 informational text argument, teacher rubrics, and student anchor charts at that site. All right, want to make sure we have time for any questions. I didn't think I saw any questions in the chat. So if you do have any questions, you can just put them right there. Megan, was there anything else that you wanted to add that maybe we forgot to say for folks as they might be formulating any questions? Awesome. Okay. And one of the things I just want to make sure to highlight, I think Megan hit this pretty well, is the alignment to STAR, or the referencing of the STAR questions. Though, of course, we didn't just take them straight from there. We expounded upon them, gave a lot of questions, and thinking about how you might use this in your classroom as a resource, in addition to what you already might have. Okay, a question came up, how will this be published? And the answer is in a spiral book. So it's going to be spiral bound. And the way that we're actually going to have it printed is that you'll actually have a model of it right here. We'll have the student anchor chart on one side and the teacher questions on the other side. So you can actually be holding it up and looking at it as a teacher and seeing it in this view while you are modeling the student chart on the other side. And again, that was feedback that was given to us by some teachers out in the field. So it's going to have it on one side here and the student version here. And then we are talking about publishing the student version as a PDF in addition to your printed spiral bound, so that you can display it on the screen during instruction. All right, you guys, as I mentioned before, this is going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. It'll probably take us till tomorrow. It usually takes a while to download the entire webinar. So we will put that up on the YouTube channel so you can check it out. The store is live for those pre-sales. And if you are looking to get bulk, let us know. But really just want to make this uncomplicated for everybody and really helping to lead our students to mastery of reading. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight, for watching this recording, if that pertains to you. We appreciate all you're doing so much. And yeah, we'll talk to you later. Bye, everyone. Thank you.